Good morning and welcome to the program. The Cabinet last night signed off on a new troop deployment to Iraq. As expected, it will be part of a joint mission with New Zealand. The New Zealand PM flagging more than 140 troops last week. We're yet to have this confirmed, the number of troops that Australia will provide. But as I say, confirmation this morning that we've been able to secure. The Prime Minister and the Cabinet signed off on this new troop deployment to Iraq in the Cabinet last night. Here was the Foreign Minister asked about that this morning.
I'm not going to preempt any announcement about that, but I'm sure you'll be hearing more from the Prime Minister on that issue today.
Did Cabinet sign off on that last night?
I won't talk about Cabinet matters. The Prime Minister can speak about that matter later today.
Coming up a bit later, Liberal frontbencher Steve Chobo and Labor's Brendan O'Connor. First, though, one of the members of the Cabinet, the Finance Minister Matthias Cormann. Senator Cormann, thanks for your time. I guess you're not going to preempt the Prime Minister either, but in the broader scheme of things, it's not entirely a surprise that Australia would team up with New Zealand as part of an effort to bolster the Iraqi forces.
Well, Australia has been involved for some time now in a very important mission in Iraq, international efforts to fight the ISIL threat. It's obviously an evolving situation. We continue to be engaged in regular conversations with our friends and allies around the world and also with the Iraqi government. And no doubt, if and as announcements are to be made, they will be made by the Prime Minister and the Defence Minister.
As I understand it, the Prime Minister to take it to the party room this morning. We'll have full coverage of that story right throughout the day. On to matters of your responsibility, the Business Council of Australia suggesting that there be a 10-year plan in the budget, not short-term fiscal tightening. This is quite a shift from the peak business body.
Well, we agree with the Business Council of Australia, and of course in last year's budget, the situation that we inherited from our predecessors, the 10-year trajectory that we were on was $667 billion of government debt and rising. As a result of the decisions that we've made so far, we've been able to reduce government debt within the decade by nearly $170 billion and falling beyond that. So we totally agree that the focus ought to be on putting Australia on a stronger foundation over the medium to long term. If we were to continue to add to debt, it would over time detract from economic growth as rising public sector debt crowds out private sector investment. And so from our point of view, that is exactly what we're trying to do.
Has enough been done in that budget, I guess, in the context of the $170 billion that you refer to across the decade? We also have to consider the $116 billion, I think it is, that has not passed. According to the Parliamentary Budget Office, that's how much the measures that have been blocked in the Senate would have saved over the next 10 years. Well,
we've made significant progress. We're in a much stronger position now than we would have been if we hadn't progressed some of the savings we've progressed so far. Again, last night, another $740 million in savings were ticked off by the Senate. Last sitting week of the Senate at $1.3 billion in savings were ticked off. So bit by bit, we keep adding up to it. But you're right. We've got to continue to press ahead to ensure that we're on the best possible trajectory for the future, to ensure that Australia is on the best possible trajectory for the future so we can strengthen economic growth, create more jobs, and to make sure that help for families, government help for families, is affordable and sustainable over the medium to long term.
But are you going to move forward, I guess, with a concession that those savings, upwards of $110 billion over a decade, that they won't eventuate? So you've basically got to start from where you are now in a political sense, and all of that gets basically, a concession. You're not going to secure that.
Well, I don't agree with that blanket statement at all, because, if you look at the way things have been progressing since the budget, so we progressively have implemented saving after saving. About $10 billion in savings connected to the repeal of the mining tax, $50 billion in savings over the decade, and we've added every sitting fortnight, we've added more savings to it. As I mentioned last night, another $740 million worth of savings were passed by the Senate with the passage of the Tax and Superannuation Laws Amendment Bill number 5. Now, we will continue to press ahead. Some things, some of the more difficult structural reforms will continue to be subject of a national conversation, I'm sure, about the best way forward, and there may be an adjustment here, an adjustment there, and these announcements will be made at the appropriate time.
Is it fair to say it's more incremental now from the next budget, the next hockey budget? Is it Is it incremental as opposed to the big cuts? Because that seems to be what Jennifer Westacott and the BCA suggested.
You know, with the benefit of hindsight, and the Prime Minister, the Treasurer, myself, we've all said it, like there's no doubt that with the benefit of hindsight, last year we tried perhaps to do too much at once. We tried to bite off more than we could chew, and that is to a degree why we've been having some of the difficult conversations over the past year or so. But, I mean, the fundamental task remains, and that is to repair the budget situation that we inherited in order to put Australia in a stronger economic foundation for the future, to ensure that we can create more jobs and make sure that everybody has the best possible opportunity to get ahead.
Well, part of that, I guess, is revenue as well, government revenue, and there's $45 billion a year in tax concessions in the superannuation space. Is this something that needs to be tackled once and for all?
Well, the issue that you're raising here is on whether or not we should increase taxes on people's retirement savings. And in the lead up to the last election, we made a very clear commitment, which we will keep, and that is that we won't make any negative, unexpected changes, adverse, unexpected changes to superannuation tax and policy settings in this term of government. Obviously, there is a conversation to be had right across government on how we can ensure that over the medium to long term our policy settings are sustainable, and that conversation is best had as part of the tax white paper review process.
Do you think there's a risk if you did tackle super, like Labor's hinting it's going to do in terms of the tax concessions for the wealthy, that those individuals will simply put their money elsewhere, that it just won't, that the revenue won't come in anyway?
It is certainly true that to suggest that somehow by putting the top marginal tax rate in place across the board, it is certainly true that that would have behavioural impacts, which means that you wouldn't just, it doesn't just follow that you would be able to collect all of that revenue in one full swoop, and that is certainly not something that I would suggest anybody seriously consider. The truth, though, is that it's a matter of balance. And the best vehicle to pursue this issue really is the tax white paper review process. And from the government's point of view, of course, any proposal out of that process that we decide to adopt, we would take to another election so that people across Australia would have the opportunity to pass judgment on that.
The Medicare co-payment's going to go, as we understand it. I guess the Prime Minister drawing a line in the sand. He's copped too much political flack over this, and he's not willing to cop any more.
The Health Minister, Susan Lee, has been conducting consultations with the medical profession and a range of other stakeholders, as we said we would do. She has reported to government the findings of those consultations and has made recommendations on a proposed way forward. That discussion is going into the party room today, and no doubt there'll be announcements soon after that.
As Finance Minister, though, are you comfortable with where this is at, given you're the one who has to make the numbers add up?
Well, as Finance Minister, and from the perspective of anyone in government, our focus is on making sure that Medicare is protected for the long term, that Medicare is sustainable for the long term, and it's important that we continue to head in the right direction in making sure that happens. Obviously there were some issues with the proposal that we put forward in the budget last year. We need to go back to the drawing board when it comes to making sure that any price signal is structured in a way that works in the best possible way.
So you're still committed to a price signal, though?
Well, what we're committed to is making sure that Medicare is protected for the long term. What we're committed to is to ensure that vulnerable patients, pensioners, concession card holders, children and the like are able to benefit from bulk billing arrangements over the medium to long term. And what we're committed to is to ensure that that access, timely and affordable access for patients to high quality healthcare is also affordable for taxpayers. So
does that have to be a price signal to achieve all of those things?
Well, in the context of a growing demand for healthcare services as a result of the ageing population in particular, we do need to ensure that the limited resources available from taxpayers are deployed in the most efficient way possible, so that they can stretch as far as possible, so that they can, in a sustainable fashion, give access to pensioners and concession card holders and the like to bulk billing arrangements as they're currently in place.
This has been the subject of a lot of complaints from the backbench. One of the key gripes, I suppose, with the leadership, getting rid of this. Do you think that the Prime Minister is now safe in the job for the foreseeable future?
The leadership of the Liberal Party was settled a few weeks ago when we had a vote on a spill motion. The Prime Minister received the clear support of the party room, and so from where I sit, it's onwards and upwards, and we're all focused on the job we were elected to do, and that is to put Australia on a stronger foundation for the future.
And on the Labor plan for multinational tax avoidance, to try and crack down on that, why doesn't the government adopt that? It seems to make sense if you're going to generate an extra $2 billion in revenue over 3 years.
Well, firstly, Labor is blocking about $30 billion worth of savings. So, even if what Labor was saying was true, it's a very small amount in the context of what Labor is currently blocking. Secondly, Labor talks a lot about what they want to do in terms of addressing multinational tax evasion. When they were in government, they made lots of announcements, but they didn't actually legislate a lot of them. 96 unlegislated tax measures we were confronted with when we came into government. The particular measure in relation to multinational tax evasion that Labor initiated in government, Treasury told us on coming into government, was unimplementable. The announcement that Labor made yesterday, based on the advice that we've got available, would actually hurt legitimate business activity and, as such, put jobs at risk in Australia. We are committed to fighting tax evasion wherever it occurs. We have already passed legislation. We're pursuing further measures through the G20 and the OECD to make sure that every business that generates profits in Australia pays their fair share of tax.
Because it's a problem. Chris Jordan from the Tax Office suggesting yesterday that $1 billion alone in e-commerce.
And Chris Jordan is working very hard with his team at the Australian Tax Office to ensure that every last dollar that is owed to the Australian people from businesses generating profits in Australia is collected by the Australian Tax Office. And we're always looking at ways that we can do things better. But it's important to get the balance right. And it's important that whatever we do doesn't hurt businesses pursuing legitimate business strategies to grow their business, create more jobs.
Minister, thanks for your time.
Always good to talk to you.
After the break, Steve Chobo and Brendan O'Connor.